U.S. pilots discovered an incredible truth behind captured Betty bomber's unprotected fuel tanks. Jack Thompson crouched beneath the assembly line of rusted wing parts, his hands sifting through memories of battle between nostalgia and despair. The faint aroma of aviation oil hung in the air, a reminder of his father's glory days when their small shop buzzed with life. As he eyed the stack of bills on his desk, a heaviness settled in his chest. The weight of survival gnawed at him. His daughter, Emma, dreamed of brighter skies, but their reality felt like a never-ending descent into chaos. Just days before his father's funeral, he discovered something hidden among the old photographs and service medals, a folder that contained damning documents on the Betty bomber. Jack's heart raced as he read about fuel tank design flaws that had led to fatal crashes, his father's fellow soldiers among the lost. He felt a spark of purpose ignite within. Could he expose the truth, honor his father's legacy, and perhaps even save lives? Yet doubt quickly followed. Was this endeavor worth risking the last few threads of their business? He had already seen the strain in Emma's once smiling face, the glimmer of hope wavering in her teenage eyes. Jack's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Should he honor his father's commitment to integrity, or prioritize his daughter's security? As the specter of failure loomed over their heads, he envisioned the local aerospace company, shrewd and greedy, sniffing out his findings, preparing to hijack his revelation. The weight of his father's legacy bore down heavily. High stakes blurred the line between a noble quest and reckless abandon. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Jack's heart hardened with resolve, but his wife's voice echoed in his mind, no longer the supportive partner she once was. You're chasing a ghost, Jack. What's it going to get you? She had snapped, fear wrinkling her brow. Jack met her gaze, feeling the sting of betrayal by the only family he had left. He wrestled with the thought that truth might be a luxury he could no longer afford. As night swathed the small town, he and Emma huddled over copious notes and diagrams scattered across the kitchen table, their silent camaraderie shielding them from the storm brewing outside. Ideas turned into potential plans over cups of bitter instant coffee, but with each passing moment, uncertainty clawed at his resolve. Would unveiling the past salvage his family's honor, or bury them deeper into obscurity? With the midnight oil burning, Jack contemplated the community presentation looming on the horizon. Their hopes hung like a fragile aircraft, caught between soaring aspirations and crash landings. He gripped the folder tightly, adrenaline coursing through him, but the stakes had never been higher. Every choice rippled with consequences. Tomorrow, he would lift off into uncharted skies. Would he dare to fly high, or would he plunge straight into the abyss of failure? The ghosts of the past crowded his thoughts, whispering doubts. Jack inhaled deeply, feeling the cold sweat trickle down his back. The decision awaited, potent and daunting, as he stood at the threshold of his father's legacy and his family's future, teetering on the brink of history itself. Jack awoke to the sound of rain tapping against the roof, an unrelenting reminder of the storm that mirrored his tumultuous emotions. The morning light filtered weakly through the fogged windows, but as he stood at the kitchen sink, washing last night's coffee mugs, he felt a relentless clarity weaving its way through the haze of doubt. Today he would present his discoveries, not just the truth about the Betty bomber, but his father's legacy, and ultimately, the fight for his family's survival. Emma's sleepy footsteps broke his contemplation. She appeared, hair tousled, and instantly he saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, the spark that had dimmed over the past months. It was a reminder of why he needed to do this. They both wanted to make their way back to a better life, one reminiscent of the vibrancy this shop once held. As she poured herself a cup of coffee, he could sense her curiosity about the day ahead, tinged with anxiety. "Are you ready, Dad?" she asked, her voice soft yet edged with an underlying seriousness. He couldn't tell if the question pertained to the presentation or to him personally. I think so, Jack replied, though uncertainty flickered in the depths of his mind. The chill in the air felt heavier as they drove to the presentation venue. Jack's heart raced, each traffic light felt like an eternity. His internal debate spiraled again, was the truth worth the risk? Could he really present these findings, knowing they could backfire or be dismissed? Was he foolhardy to believe that his father's reputation could still command respect in an industry often ruled by profit margins? As they arrived, Jack assumed the role of the desperate father and husband fighting against insurmountable odds. He dismissed those earlier doubts, reminded that the very notion of suffering endured by countless families was enough to build his resolve. He glanced at Emma, her body tense as she met his eyes, nodding in encouragement. Standing before the small audience later that morning, several faces wearing a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, Jack presented not only numbers and data but also the heart-wrenching stories of the pilots who had died due to the design flaws his father had painstakingly documented. Each slide turned was a step deeper into an abyss, yet he felt an unexpected buoyancy as he spoke of integrity and accountability, values he wanted Emma to remember. But then came the silence. The room, once buzzing with murmurs, seemed to freeze. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Those onlookers he hoped would understand were staring, some with indifference, others with barely concealed hostility. The tension crackled like static electricity, and from the back of the room, he heard an almost mocking voice. "And what are you planning to do with this, Jack? Expose us all to save a few faceless pilots?" The figure stepped into the light, a towering representative of the aerospace company, his eyes glinting with challenge. Jack's pulse quickened. This was his confrontation, the moment his doubts could either shatter or solidify his resolve. "I plan to save lives and tell the truth," he shot back, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. The air grew thick as he witnessed the shift in the crowd. Their expressions were no longer neutral. Interest peaked, the audience seemed to lean in, absorbing every challenge he threw back at the antagonist. But the battle was just beginning. After the initial presentation, Jack faced backroom deals and veiled threats. The company's representative, already simmering with impatience, approached him, fingers drumming lightly against a nearby wall as if contemplating his next move. Jack's heart thudded against his ribs as he carefully considered his next steps. Each decision could illuminate his path or lead him further into the grasp of destructive influence. Would he fortify his convictions, harnessing the truth as a weapon, or would he crumble under the weight of corporate pressures threatening to engulf him? Determination surged through him, he refused to buckle. Yet in the back of his mind, he wondered, what would happen next? Would his revelation secure the safety of others or seal his fate? As the meeting concluded, Jack felt an unsettling mix of adrenaline and uncertainty coursing through him. The tension in the room echoed in his thoughts like an unwelcome specter. He had faced the corporate titan, but as he stepped away, accompanied by Emma's cautious optimism, he realized that this confrontation was but a prelude. Outside, the rain had intensified, a cacophony that seemed to mirror the storm brewing within him. The moment he reached the car, the walls he had just bravely contested felt like they were closing in. "Did I really get through to them?" he murmured, barely audible, as he gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with anxiety. Emma turned to him, concern etched on her face. "You were amazing, Dad. You stood up to them. Did it matter?" He replied, his voice thick with doubt. "They still hold all the power. What if they just laugh this off?" Emma was quiet for a moment, as if assessing the weight of his despair. "You showed them you won't back down. That's something." But the weight of her reassurance did little to lift the burden Jack felt. He drove them home mechanically, struggling to focus on the road while his mind raced with what-ifs. Had he ignited a faint flicker of hope, or merely brought upon a storm of retaliation? Later that evening, after Emma had retreated to her room with a book, Jack sat alone at the dining table, surrounded by piles of documents and digital reports. The damp air thickened as he scrolled through images of the Betty bomber, his father's meticulous notes now imbued with a purpose deeper than he had imagined. It was a picture not just of a flawed aircraft but of a man's life work, a testament that needed a voice, and that voice was his own. His phone buzzed on the tabletop, jolting him from his reverie. The message displayed the name of an unknown number. Tentatively, he opened it, reading the simple yet disconcerting text, "We need to talk. What you uncovered is bigger than you think." His heart dropped, the room constricting around him. This was the moment of truth, the realization that his fight was far from over. The implications of his discoveries loomed larger than the threats he had faced. He felt vulnerable, yet beneath the fear, a flicker of curiosity ignited. Who was this person? What did they know? Jack's mind spiraled with questions. Was this a chance to delve deeper into the truth? Could there be allies hidden within the shadows of this treacherous game? The resolve within him began to crystallize, shaping into the conviction that he had something worth fighting for, not just for himself and his daughter, but for those affected by the Boeing blunders left unaddressed for too long. "Emma," he called softly, summoning her from her sanctuary. As she appeared in the doorway, Jack hesitated, the weight of the moment compelling him to reconsider divulging the unknown peril lurking in the shadows. "Are you okay?" she asked, genuine concern written on her features. "I need to take a risk, something bigger is on the line here," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "What do you mean?" she probed, her inquisitiveness piercing through his burgeoning conviction. "I think I have a way to archive the truth, not just for us, but for all those who deserve to know." With a mixture of trepidation and determination, Jack opened his laptop before her, illuminating the path ahead. Each keystroke resonated with the possibility of revelation, the weight of accountability urging him forward into uncharted territory. As he began crafting an email to the unknown figure, a knot tightened in his stomach. There was no turning back. The time had come to face whatever darkness lay ahead, armed not just with the legacy of his father but with his own burgeoning courage. In the silence that stretched between them, Jack felt the foundations of something powerful begin to shift. What awaited him on the other side of this unknown conversation could either forge an opportunity for truth or unleash a new set of dangers he wasn't yet prepared to confront. The morning sun struggled to pierce the overcast sky, reflecting Jack's own reluctance to face the day. The remnants of last night's conversation with Emma echoed in his mind as he replayed the moment, invigorated by her encouragement yet burdened by the weight of uncertainty. Sitting at the breakfast table, he stared at the remnants of toast as if it contained the answers he sought. Each sip of coffee tasted bitter, mirroring the tight knot in his gut. He needed a plan, a way to bridge the gap between his revelations and the potential allies that could help amplify his voice. That anonymous text had ignited a flicker of resolve, but it also introduced a myriad of new risks. As the clock ticked on, Jack found himself consumed by the digital world before him. He felt like a man digging for gold in an endlessly expanding cave, each click revealing the intricacies of his father's legacy and the government's systemic failures. The Betty bomber project was multifaceted, its implications as vast as the oceans it was designed to traverse. After several hours of laboring over the keyboard, Jack sent the email, his heart racing at the uncertainty it presented. The reply would determine if he tapped into a network of information that could bolster his cause or if he had merely opened Pandora's box. Just as he hit send, a sense of exhilaration mixed with dread washed over him, a reminder that honesty often walks hand in hand with vulnerability. Emma's voice broke through the silence. "Dad, are you coming to see what I found?" She was referring to a documentary about aviation safety that had caught her interest. "Sure, let me just," Jack stammered, an internal battle raging between his mounting resolve and the distraction of familial connection. He had committed to seeking the truth, yet here it was, presenting itself in the form of his daughter's young curiosity. As they sat together, engagement filled the air. Jack began to realize that his fight was not just professional, it was deeply personal. Each story in the documentary echoed the struggles of families impacted by aviation failures. It made the abstract tangible. The documentary's emphasis on rigorous safety standards propelled Jack's thoughts toward the fate of workers and families waiting for answers. By pursuing this story, he wasn't just fighting for justice, he was preserving those narratives. Do you think people really care about this stuff? Emma asked, her eyes wide with youthful sincerity. It matters more than they realize, Jack replied, the words bursting forth. People have a responsibility to know the truth, especially when lives are at stake. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Jack's heart raced, it was too soon for a reply to his email. He opened the door cautiously, revealing a figure cloaked in a rain jacket. I'm here to talk, the figure said, staring Jack down with an intensity that brought back memories of the high-pressure meeting with corporate executives. We need to discuss what you've uncovered. Jack's pulse quickened. Was this the ally he had hoped for, or another layer of complication? Something about this interaction felt like another pivot point, a doorway to deeper intrigue or imminent peril. Standing in his own home, pinned between the safety of the familiar and the unknown menace looming before him, Jack felt his determination solidify. There was no backing down, this was the escalation he had anticipated. As he stepped aside to allow the figure in, Jack understood that this conversation would direct not just the trajectory of his own journey, but the fate of many who had been silenced for too long. The moment of truth was settling like tension in the air, a reminder that he had crossed a threshold from which there would be no retreat. Would he operate in his father's shadow or carve out his own legacy? The figure, as yet unnamed, walked past him, and with their arrival, Jack braced himself for the revelations to come. What awaited him might reshape everything he understood about courage and accountability, deepening the very roots of the fight. Ahead. Jack barely registered the figure's entrance into his home, his mind racing through a torrent of thoughts. Who was this person, and what did they know? The air felt electric, pulsing with the promise of the unknown. Regaining a semblance of control over his nerves, he offered a curt nod and gestured toward the living room. Let us talk. As they settled in, Jack studied the figure more closely, disheveled hair complementing a grim expression. He looked as if he had weathered storms of his own, and the weight of his presence imposed an urgency Jack hadn't anticipated. You've been digging into the Betty Bomber project, the figure began without preamble, his voice low but firm. Someone has to look out for the truth. But you have to be careful. Jack felt a flicker of skepticism. Who are you exactly? And how did you know to come here? He didn't want to sound confrontational, but the stakes were too high for blind trust. The figure leaned forward, eyes sharp. I have contacts in the aviation community. Information flows through various channels, even when hidden. I know about your father's involvement and the negligence that went unnoticed. Jack flinched at the mention of his father. It was a double-edged sword. His father's legacy was both a source of pride and a burden that pressed heavily on his shoulders. What's your angle? He pressed. Truth. Justice. You need allies who understand the network you're up against. The Betty Bomber project isn't just about aviation, it's intertwined with government contracts, dangerous lobbying, and the safety protocols that were overlooked. The figure paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. You want to expose that? I can help, but you must be prepared for the repercussions. Jack's mind raced. Every ounce of his instincts screamed caution. What if this was a trap? Yet the allure of uncovering deeper truths, of bringing to light the injustices he'd begun to glimpse, threw him into a moral whirlwind. Could he really turn back now, despite the risks? I'm doing this for the families affected by these failures, people like you and me, Jack asserted, sounding steadier than he felt. The flicker of resolve that Emma had ignited was roaring back to life. I won't be complicit in their silence. A slight smile broke across the figure's face as if he recognized Jack's determination. Good. We need someone with that conviction. Let us get down to specifics. As they exchanged information, delving into the labyrinthine networks connecting government contracts, corporate interests, and the irrefutable evidence Jack had unearthed, the atmosphere shifted. The sense that Jack was teetering on the edge of a precipice took hold. This was not a simple task of reporting the facts but a plunge into a world fraught with complexity and peril. Suddenly, a sense of clarity emerged. This was no longer just about honoring his father's legacy, it was about reclaiming it. Jack felt a burgeoning awareness of his capabilities to confront institutional failure that far surpassed any shadow cast by his father. However, the deeper their conversation went, the louder the alarms rang in Jack's mind. The lurking fear that the forces opposing him would not take his pursuit lightly loomed larger. The prospect of retaliation, both personal and professional, hung heavily over him. As the figure wrapped up their strategies on communication and potential media contacts, a new urgency tightened Jack's chest. With a bow to courage and a deep sense of accountability, he found himself at a critical juncture. Decisions loomed, not just for him but for those families he had sworn to defend. "We need to meet again," Jack said, feeling the clarity of his commitment crystallize. "But we must stay under the radar until then." "I'll reach out," the figure replied, narrowing his eyes, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. As the figure stepped out into the dim light of the overcast sky, Jack felt both liberated and constricted. Each heartbeat echoed with the realization that courage was not merely an act but a series of choices made under duress. Jack stood in the doorway, watching the figure disappear into the shadows. The weight of what he was now tasked with settled upon him. Would he confront these institutions directly, or would he play into their traps, risking everything in the process? The determination surged within him, igniting a question that lingered in the air. With this alliance established, was he merely a player in a broader game, or had he finally seized the reins of his own destiny? Jack only had one way to find out. As he turned, the sound of his own breath seemed louder. The stakes had just transformed into a palpable urgency that beckoned him forward, ready for whatever awaited him next. Standing in the doorway, Jack felt the gravity of his choices intensify. With the hours of darkness pressing against his back, he stepped inside, closing the door with a resolute click that resonated through his small, quiet home. In the periphery, the shadows of regret and worry danced as the new reality settled around him, enveloping him in its complexity. Jack was no longer merely a journalist chasing stories, he had become a reluctant investigator, propelled by a moral imperative that demanded more than just observation. It demanded action. As he paced the living room, the walls seemed to echo his internal struggle. How had he gotten to this point? His pulse quickened as he recalled the conversations that had led him here, the muffled voices of those lost families and the incidents left unexamined by those who had sworn to protect them. Every investigative reporter faced moments of doubt, but Jack's uncertainty was tinged with a personal history far too close for comfort. His father's legacy loomed like a specter, distorting his path forward. He craved to harness that legacy, a legacy of honesty and accountability, but the risk felt colossal. What if he failed, or worse, what if he brought retaliation upon those he loved? Seated at his desk, Jack found his laptop awaiting him like an old friend. The simple act of opening it provided a sense of normalcy amidst the storm. Yet the anxiety clenched tighter in his chest. He had to muster his courage and become the advocate these families desperately needed. Scanning the digital notes he had compiled over the past weeks, he couldn't shake the sense of being watched. Each line he typed felt loaded, each piece of evidence a potential weapon he was assembling against unseen adversaries. He opened a blank document, typing Betty Bomber Project, Exploration of Negligence. As he continued his notes, he reflected on the figure's warning about the powerful interests tangled in this network. For the first time, Jack confronted the reality that he was stepping into dangerous territory, endangering not only himself but potentially others involved. The urgency that had ignited within him now transformed into a potent mix of fear and resolve. He clicked on links, diving deeper into the murky waters of corporate misconduct. Names jumped off the pages, major defense contractors, shady lobbying firms, and a timeline that stitched together negligence that had lasted years. Jack's fingers flew over the keyboard, deadlines and legal ramifications swirling in his mind. He was committed to unfold this narrative, not just as a storyteller but as a whistleblower. Each new piece of information acted as a window, peeling back layers of complicity and revealing dark truths. Yet along with this exhilaration, a gnawing doubt lingered at the forefront of his mind. What if he was misconstruing the facts? What if he placed too much trust in the figure's intentions? The precarious dance between seeking the truth and clinging to an imagined safety began to plague him. Determined to make his next move count, Jack reached out to Emma. He needed someone he could trust, someone who could provide insight and perspective. Her skills as an attorney could help clarify the legal ramifications of what he planned to expose. It was a vulnerable choice. Sharing this new chapter of his life meant unearthing secrets he had only recently begun to confront. However, Jack realized that sharing his fears was also an exercise in courage. As the phone rang, each tone reverberated with the weight of uncertainty. He contemplated how she would react to his discoveries, whether she would view this as a reckless endeavor or a righteous cause. Jack. Emma's voice broke through, evocative and grounding. Emma, we need to talk. There is something big that could change everything. Jack outlined their challenges ahead, and as he listened to Emma's calm assessment, the sounds of conviction strengthened his resolve. With her by his side, each obstacle seemed less daunting. But as their conversation unfolded, paranoia began gnawing at him once again. He couldn't shake the feeling that his pursuit was being monitored. Somebody from the shadows, perhaps the very entities he sought to expose, must know what he was doing. As the details of their plan took shape, Jack also recognized the risks associated with their actions. Would he be able to protect those involved, or would he put them in even greater danger? Jack, we'll do this together, Emma reassured him. But we need a clear strategy. The urgency surged, anxiety intermingling with determination. Jack knew this was only the beginning. As they forged ahead, he felt the chilling sensation of eyes observing him from the darkness, silently gauging his every move. And with that ominous thought anchoring his mind, Jack realized that he had stepped onto the battlefield, a mission steeped in hidden motives and undiscovered truths. The question loomed above all else: would courage be enough to guide him through the labyrinthine dangers ahead, or would it lead him into a trap from which there was no escape? The ground beneath him shifted as Jack understood that each action he took would reverberate back through the lives of countless individuals. With a renewed sense of purpose, he prepared himself for the storm that lay just ahead, a storm that would demand everything he had to give. With dawn's first light filtering through the curtains, Jack's resolve was palpable. He had spent sleepless hours at his desk, piecing together the origins of the allegations surrounding the Betty Bomber project. The early morning sun felt almost like a blessing, promising clarity along with its warmth. Today was crucial. He needed to establish a foundation for his investigation, one that would not only expose the negligence behind the scenes but also safeguard the innocent who had been swept into this storm. Sipping his coffee, he stared intently at his notes. The names connected like a constellation, and he felt himself drawn deeper into a world that thrived on secrecy and deception. Panic gripped him momentarily, a reminder that every name and every connection came with weighty ethical implications. He had always believed that journalism was a tool for exposing truths, but what he was about to embark on could either solidify that belief or shatter it entirely. He opened a folder labeled Essential Contacts, knowing he needed to tread carefully in choosing allies. He considered reaching out to other journalists, activists, or even government officials who might share his interests and perhaps his concerns. He needed to ensure that he wasn't acting in a vacuum. To explore this labyrinth, he needed a team, one that could provide both strength and verification of the truths he was seeking. The phone call with Emma echoed in his mind, a reminder of her steadfastness. He needed her legal acumen as a guiding star, yet their partnership demanded transparency. This partnership required strict boundaries, both personal and professional. Would she be able to keep her distance from the emotional turmoil that threatened to spiral, especially knowing that Jack could take on a dangerous path? Panic surged again as he realized that he might not only be risking his career but embroiling both of them in something far more perilous. As he pondered the contacts he might include in his network, an idea struck him. He quickly began crafting a small, strategic questionnaire that would help him gauge if others felt as strongly as he did about the ethical implications around the Betty Bomber project. He asked questions about integrity, personal experiences with corporate deceit, and their motivations for wanting to address these issues. Jack knew these conversations would not come without their own set of risks. Their responses could open doors he couldn't foresee, potentially leading to revelations or, worse, consequences he couldn't control. As he prepared to send out the inquiries, an unsettling thought struck him: what if the very organizations he was challenging had machines of surveillance operating within their walls? Distrust crept into his mind, twisting his excitement into an uncomfortable knot in his stomach. Every digital correspondence had the potential to be eavesdropped on, every heartbeat echoing like a warning siren. He pressed his fingers against his temples. It was time to solidify his approach, ensuring that he moved with precision and stealth. His thoughts turned to Emma. He needed to discuss their next steps in person, to strategize how to remain ahead of those likely keeping tabs on them. But it wasn't just about the planning. Meeting her face to face would reinforce their bonds, the need to trust, to communicate without a screen dividing them. Quickly drafting a text, he proposed a location where they could meet surreptitiously, a small cafe tucked away from prying eyes. He needed to gauge her reactions, to sense the gravity of their undertaking. But just as he hit send, a sudden impression of being watched flooded him. Jack glanced out the window, but the street appeared normal, filled with the mundane pulse of a city waking up. Nonetheless, he couldn't shake the feeling that his every move was being tracked. As he paced the confines of his home, doubt began to resurface, warping his resolve. Was he truly prepared for the cascading tides he was about to unleash? Jack had always pursued the truth, that much was clear. But now, the stakes felt perilously higher. The potential to not only destroy the reputations of the powerful may bring devastation to those closest to him. The moment of truth of his burgeoning investigation loomed ever nearer, and as he gathered his materials, a dark, foreboding thought chilled him. Was naivety the only thing standing in the way of a deeper corruption he could not yet fathom? He knew he had taken the first step, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, a maze of consequences waiting to ensnare him. Jack was on the precipice of discovery, ready to confront whatever awaited him for the sake of accountability. But as new doubts edged in, he prepared himself for what lay just beyond the horizon of truth. Prophetic whispers of danger loomed, suggesting that a series of confrontations were fast approaching, and potentially, they would test his very essence. The cafe shimmered under the late morning sun, sunlight dancing on the polished surfaces, throwing shadows across the small tables. Jack arrived early, his heart racing as he pushed through the door. He had chosen this place for its nondescript appearance, a safe harbor where they could craft their next moves without the threat of prying eyes. As he settled into a corner seat, Jack began to feel the weight of purpose settle on his shoulders. He had spent countless hours thinking about his motivations and the implications of unearthing the truths behind the Betty Bomber project. Here, surrounded by unfamiliar chatter and the aroma of coffee, his thoughts sharpened. His resolve crystallized around one undeniable fact: he was, and always would be, a seeker of the truth, even when the world around him seemed intent on obscuring it. Jack pulled out his phone to review the responses he had started to receive from his questionnaire. They ranged from enthusiastic affirmations to cautionary tales, but the common thread was unmistakable. Those he reached out to were hungry for change, fueled by their own experiences of betrayal and loss in the corporate realm. And yet, doubt cast a long shadow over his intentions. Was he the right person to guide such an investigation? Was he prepared to bear the burden of their hopes and perhaps their disappointments? Lost in thought, he nearly missed the moment Emma walked through the door, her bright smile breaking through his cloud of apprehension. Today, she didn't need to don her usual professional facade. The weight of their shared mission allowed for a glimpse of the genuine camaraderie that had formed between them. As she approached, Jack studied the subtle changes in her demeanor. Her confidence and experience contrasted sharply with his own simmering anxieties. "Jack!" she called, lowering her voice as she slid into the seat opposite him. There was excitement in her eyes, tempered by a hint of caution. "I sent out the questionnaire. The responses have started flooding in, he said, barely masking his nervous energy. Some are eager to connect, while others throw up red flags. Emma leaned in. That's to be expected. This is new territory for both of us. But it's important that we gather as much evidence as possible. He could see the determination behind her words as she spoke. She was seasoned in navigating legal minefields, and the thought of having someone so steadfast by his side lent him reassurance. In her presence, he felt emboldened to unearth the unsettling truths that had remained buried in shadows. Yet, their conversation swiftly transformed into a strategic session, rife with questions that would challenge the core of their ethical stances. Emma proposed drafting formal letters to the sources who had responded positively, but Jack hesitated. Direct outreach could expose them not just to scrutiny but potential retaliation. I'm worried about the consequences if we're too direct, he confessed. What if we raise alarms before we're ready? Emma bit her lip in contemplation. Every decision we make carries risk, but it also leads us closer to the truth. Once we have sufficient evidence, the pattern will emerge. We need to leverage that. Jack's mind raced through the implications of revealing their exploration too early or too bluntly. The stakes were climbing, far beyond mere professional curiosity. They were now personally entangled in an unfolding drama that could alter lives irrevocably. What if their pursuit for the truth set off a chain reaction that put them both into jeopardy? An unmistakable tension crept in as they brainstormed the next steps, their voices rising with urgency. A meeting with a whistleblower was proposed, someone who had witnessed unethical practices firsthand but remained in the shadows. Each plan they crafted brought forth a wave of fear and an exquisite thrill. The excitement of potential revelations danced hand in hand with the looming threat of dark repercussions. As the conversation finally dwindled, Jack noticed a man seated at the counter, his gaze seemingly fixed on them. An unsettling coldness gripped his gut, and he couldn't help but feel as if they were being scrutinized, their every word weighed against the scales of fate. Jack leaned closer to Emma, concern embroiling his features. What if we're not just uncovering truths but inviting hostility? We need to consider a contingency plan. Her brow furrowed but leaned into his worry. We will adapt, but we cannot shrink away from our mission. We need to be prepared for anything that comes. But did preparedness include anticipating the very worst? They found themselves navigating a perilous path, fraught with risks that threatened not just their careers but their lives. Jack took a deep breath, fueled by a heightened urgency. The time had come to face not only the veil of secrecy but any opposition that lurked in the shadows. He felt the tumult of his internal compass spin, poised at the intersection of ambition and trepidation. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Jack's mind turned to the potential dangers ahead, the threats that could emerge from a world where silence could protect those deeply flawed. Just as they stepped out into the warm sunlight, he knew they were crossing a threshold, no longer mere reporters but harbingers of reckoning. How far would they have to push to expose the truth before it consumed them? As the door swung shut behind them, so too did the barrier between the known and unknown, unraveling layers of the conflict that lay just beyond their reach, beckoning them forward into a storm they had barely begun to fathom. The humid air clung to Jack's skin as he and Emma stepped onto the bustling city street, the thrum of life around them a stark contrast to the cloud of tension hanging over their mission. Jack could feel the weight of decision pressing down, a physical sensation that made his heart race. With every step, he acknowledged the truth: they were venturing not just into the unknown territory of corporate deceit, but into the very marrow of personal ethics and accountability. We need to set a timeline, Emma said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but Jack sensed the underlying urgency in her tone. If we're going to meet with the whistleblower, the sooner the better. We can't afford to linger. Jack nodded, drawn into her confidence. Right. But how do we ensure our safety? We can't know who else is watching. We need a secure location. Agreed, she replied, scanning the street. An old friend of mine has a private office space we could use. It's off the grid and away from prying eyes. I'll contact him. Feeling a surge of empowerment along with a grip of apprehension, Jack realized each plan they crafted, however tentative, nudged him further down a path fraught with uncertainty yet exhilarating in its potential for change. With each word exchanged, he sensed a transformation within himself, a budding resolve to not only uncover the truth but to embrace the repercussions tied to that pursuit. "Are you ready for the fallout?" Jack asked, the question edging close to the crux of his fears. A part of him wanted to shield them from potential danger, while another part relished the challenge. Emma's gaze bore into his. "We're bringing light to corruption. They can't silence us forever. We have the responsibility to those who suffered." Responsibility. The concept weighed heavily on Jack's shoulders, a double-edged sword glinting in the sunlight. In that moment, standing on the threshold of risking everything, he recognized something crucial. He had reframed his motivation from mere curiosity to a fundamental commitment to justice. The stakes were more significant than either of them had initially grasped. No longer were they simply uncovering stories, they were drafting a narrative that could disrupt lives, including their own. As they walked, an uncomfortable thought gnawed at him. What if they were the ones unearthing something too powerful, something that those in power would stop at nothing to protect? A dawn of realizations washed over Jack. The thrill of investigation, the exhilaration of discovery, now came tinged with the sharp edge of fear. He had to be prepared to act, not just think. They reached the designated meeting point, a modest office tucked into a nondescript building. It felt unremarkable, yet its very ordinariness felt like a haven against the potential storm outside. Emma opened the door, and they stepped inside, the air thick with unsaid words and anticipation. "Let us lay out our questions, focus our approach," she instructed, her demeanor shifting into professional mode. Jack followed her lead, both fascinated and intimidated by the way she slipped effortlessly into the role of the investigator. With pens poised over paper, they began to structure their inquiry. Jack felt the tension shift. He was no longer merely a hesitant participant. The process required him to engage, unearthing hidden questions within himself. As they brainstormed, he reflected on his own biases, his own motivations, and the moral labyrinth they were navigating. The role of truth seeker morphed into something profoundly personal. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, cutting through the charged silence. The screen lit up with a notification, a message from an anonymous number, a solitary line that sent a chill racing down his spine. "You're poking around where you shouldn't. Consider this a warning." His hands trembled slightly as he shared the message with Emma. The blood drained from her face, but her resolve held steady. "This is exactly what we were anticipating," she said, her voice low. "But we can't back down now." In that moment, standing at the precipice of their endeavor, Jack understood that the real test was no longer just about revealing the truth, it was whether they could bear the weight of that truth amidst growing threats. As the ominous reality set in, the question loomed larger than ever: would their pursuit of justice fortify their determination or shatter their resolve? They ventured deeper into uncharted territory, their resolve intertwined with an unshakable fear. What would it take for them to unearth the truth without losing themselves in the process? As they prepared for the meeting, the filter between their aspirations and the potential consequences narrowed to a chilling line they might soon have to cross. But what lay on the other side of that line? The answer was just out of reach, a heartbeat away from defining their futures in unexpected ways. Jack stood at the edge of his freshly acquired office space, eyes scanning the clutter of documents sprawled across his desk. The muted sunlight streaming through the window reflected the frenetic energy that coursed through him. Only weeks ago, he had been unsure, tethered by the shadows of doubt and fear. Now, he felt a palpable sense of purpose and clarity stirring within. The connection Emma had established with a network of whistleblowers had ignited a fire that refused to be snuffed. The Diane Braddock case was gaining traction, with numerous families reaching out to share their experiences. Jack had meticulously compiled their accounts into a powerful narrative, professionally polished yet strikingly raw and emotional. This wasn't just a collection of stories, it was a thunderous indictment against negligence and systemic failure in the aviation industry. Today marked the day he would present his case to a small coalition of advocates who were equally passionate about transparency and corporate accountability. He had never hesitated to pursue the truth, but now it was fortified by the unwavering support of Emma and the chorus of voices behind him. No longer an isolated endeavor, it had transformed into a movement, a collective heartbeat pulsing toward justice. As he prepared for the meeting, Jack reflected on the challenges he had faced. The tension he once felt when confronting corporate giants had been replaced by a fierce determination. The storm of threats that had loomed over him dissipated, giving way to the atmosphere of collaboration that now surrounded him. Each phone call with Emma was infused with optimism, pushing him closer to taking the next step. When he finally entered the conference room, he felt more grounded than he'd ever been. Seated at an oval table were individuals who had not only been affected by corporate malfeasance but were eager to collaborate, to educate, and to bring change into existence. The energy was electric, a symbiotic synthesis of hope and drive. "Thank you all for being here," Jack began, his voice steady and commanding. The hush that followed felt invigorating. "I've gathered extensive documentation and personal accounts regarding the Betty bomber and its tragic legacy. What you feel and experience matters, and together we can amplify our message for systemic change." As he spoke, Jack infused his presentation with meticulous detail and undeniable urgency. He had transformed from the hesitant journalist teetering on the brink of despair into a confident advocate, commanding respect and attention. He dissected reports, revealed charts, and showcased testimonies that painted a vivid picture of the consequences hanging in the balance. The collective reactions roared back with enthusiasm, inquiries bubbling up as his fellow advocates engaged with fervor. Questions became discussions, and Jack found himself embracing every challenge with composure. The dynamic shifted, it became not just a presentation, but a collective brainstorming session that opened doors he'd never imagined. By the time Jack concluded, his heart was racing. The energy was palpable, and a sense of vindication washed over him. For every family that lost a loved one due to negligence, he was fighting to ensure their stories were heard. As discussions continued, Jack began receiving messages and commitments of support from colleagues who expressed a desire to collaborate further. It was validation. The loudest applause to his efforts came from the recognition that he was now part of something larger than himself. In this moment, he understood the true power of unity. Banishing the ghost of self-doubt that had haunted his years, Jack felt a weight lift. The responsibility he once viewed as an overwhelming burden had morphed into a driving force. He was no longer simply Jack Thompson, he was an advocate armed with knowledge and passion. As they wrapped up discussions for the day, Emma approached him, eyes shining with pride. "You were incredible, Dad. The way you commanded the room and intertwined everyone's voices, it was phenomenal." Jack realized he had finally taken ownership of his father's legacy, translating it into a commitment not just to a singular truth but to the pursuit of justice for many. Emma's praise seamlessly stitched into the fabric of his self-worth. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied, beaming at the transformation reflected in her face. Together, they stepped into the hallway, the echoes of conversation surrounding them felt like the wind beneath their wings. As they walked out of the building, a wave of exhilaration rushed over Jack. He was poised on the precipice of a new chapter, and for the first time, he felt the weight of purpose rather than doubt. He had emerged from the shadows, and the world ahead was clear. This was the moment to embrace the legacy he had once feared, transforming it into a powerful voice for those yearning for accountability. Standing there, he felt solid confidence replace trepidation. The once heavy burden had become a badge of honor, a testament to how courage can morph doubt into an undeniable resolution for change. This journey had redefined him. Jack Thompson had taken flight into the skies of truth, his identity interwoven with unyielding determination and newfound strength. As he and Emma shared a contented glance, Jack understood that not only had he achieved his goal, but he had conquered his fears and in doing so, saved himself. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help us spread messages that matter. Comment your reactions and theories about this conclusion, because your thoughts inspire us. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformative ending. You need to subscribe now. Don't wait even one more second to show your support for the power of personal overcoming stories.